Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a client build where I am going to replicate this. This is the picture she sent. Hey, can you do this? Can you whitewash a piece of furniture? I said, sure, even though I've never done it before. All right, let's see how I did. Okay, so I'm not real versed in faux finishing. I've never really done it. I am trying this for the first time here on a client build. Maybe it's not the best idea to, do a commission piece while learning a new experiment and learning a new technique. I don't know. Either way, the idea is for it to not look like plywood, and I'm gonna do the entire build, guess what, out of plywood. So hope you enjoy it, and hope you learned something, as I sure did. All right, let's get right in. Okay, first and foremost, I'm lucky to have the actual cubbies the client provided for me, and I'm kind of a visual builder. I like to set things up and see what I'm going to be building. I've got a few spacer blocks here with the necessary spacing to give enough clearance for the cubby to go in and out. I've got my measurement to make a basic spacer block here, as you see me cutting on the table saw. At this point, I'm going to take a piece of 5/8 inch Baltic birch and cut the bottoms and the top of the actual unit, and these are the partitions that are going to go in between each of the cubbies. So I've got these pieces of birch cut down to represent the partitions. I'm going to clamp the first one in place, put that spacer block in, and then put another one down and make a few marks on either side. Then I'm going to come back with a square and transfer those marks all the way across the bottom. This gives me a really good visual reference to where the partitions are going to be, as I'm not going to cut dados. I'm simply going to just screw them in with pocket holes. As you see, I repeat the process all the way down. And putting lines on both sides really helps me just get a visual on where the piece needs to be. Simply just make a few marks and transfer it to the top as well, because eventually we're going to flip this piece over and we're going to screw in those partitions into the top as well. But first I have to cut these pieces down. The best way to do it to me is to double them up and use this spacer block here. You can see I still got a little play here, but once I twist it just a little bit, it really clamps those two pieces of birch down to the sled. I can even let go, turn my dust collector on, and make this simple cut, truing both of these pieces up to the exact same length. So I'm going to use my Armor Tools pocket hole jig to put 2 pocket holes on each side of the top and bottom of the partitions. And then I'm gonna show you a little trick. A lot of times when you do pocket holes, the pieces tend to shift. Well, that's an exaggeration, but you don't want that. So what I use is some glue in a couple spots, and then I put a dab of CA glue along the surface and then activate those surfaces. And that CA glue with the activator acts as a clamp that holds everything in place. So when I go to drive the screw in, there is no movement whatsoever. Again, I got coupon codes for the CA glue and the finish I'm going to be using for this project in the description of this video. So with all 5 pieces pocket holed into the top, it's now time to flip it over and install them onto the bottom. And I'm using a clamp for the edges. And once everything's in place, you screw everything down with pocket holes, as you see here. And then it's time to flush trim these pieces, because I did cut them just a little bit larger than I needed. A flush trim bit on a palm router does the trick nicely. So it's back over to the table saw to rip down some pieces that are going to be used for the face frame and the frame that's going to be on the left and right of this unit. But first, it's time to install the back. This is a piece of 1/8 inch plywood. Make sure you make your marks before you tack this thing in place, because you don't want to shoot blindly into the piece. I've carefully made those marks to shoot into the middle. And then a flush trim bit is all you need to make this thing look really nice. Now, I will say this. An 1/8 inch material is probably okay to go through with a flush trim bit in its entirety. You see here, I'm actually cutting with it, not just trimming. If the piece of plywood was any thicker than that, I would have trimmed it even further with a jigsaw or whatnot, and then used the bit after that. So a bit of sanding and we're good to go. We're gonna flip this piece over and we're gonna start installing this face frame. Now, I'm not gonna build a face frame and then install it all at once. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna go as I go, as you see here. I basically take a few spacers, giving me the overhang I need, and I tack in this face frame. Do the same to the bottom as well. And I work my way around, kind of building the face frame as I go. I kind of like this method because I'm able to cut pieces and make sure they're installed just right. Glue and brads again. And now these pieces are going to represent the sides. The sides are going to be framed out as well. And again, I'm gonna attempt a faux finish on this. So the plywood edges are gonna be covered and everything's gonna be painted. And using Baltic birch, the 11 plies are so tight that you typically will not see the grain in those edges when you paint them as well. So now we're gonna cut down some small strips to put in the front. And again, take your time here. If they don't quite fit, you can use a hammer. Of course, I'm just kidding. This one was really tight. And the next one, for some reason, this piece just was not quite getting there, so had to go back to the table saw to trim it up, and now we're good to go. I put a little bit of glue down, and I'm gonna use some blue tape as a clamp and let that sit for a few hours, and we're good to go. So this piece needs some feet, and I'm using some square mahogany stock here. Had this strip lying on hand, figured I would use it. It's a hard material, it's good for feet for furniture, so why not? But they need to be raised up just a little bit more, so I'm taking a piece of 3/8 inch plywood, CA glue, activator, that's all you need. After you go over to the disc sander, trim these things up, put a little chamfer on it. You can see here I'm just doing this by hand. That way the wood doesn't splinter when it gets dragged across the floor. Sand them up again, and then it's time to install. And again, I'm using my, CA and regular glue method of putting down a couple of strips of regular glue. You're gonna see me do this now. And then a little dab of CA glue in the middle, just a little bit. Activate the piece and then shove it in place. And again, that CA glue acts as a clamp for the regular glue to really do its thing and give a really nice strong hold. So now it's time to turn my attention to the top of the piece. Now I got this piece of 1/8 inch plywood again, and I'm gonna cut 4 strips. I really like the interesting rustic grain in this, and I'm gonna use it for a visual appeal because we are gonna thin out some stain and thin out some paint, and we wanna be able to see this through it. So at this time, I'm gonna combine them all together and cut them all to length at the crosscut sled. And now it's time to install them. But before I do that, I'm gonna take my random orbit sander, I believe this is 80 grit, and we're gonna rough up the edges on all these pieces, kind of creating a bit more of a rustic look, of a shiplap effect that we want, or that my client wants. So with a little glue spread into the top, and when I say into the top, that face frame we made actually has a recess. It created a recess for this top to fit in. You can see these pieces nestle in, and it looks pretty good so far. And if you see the piece rocking back and forth, my workbench just isn't long enough to support all 6 feet, so it's kind of pivoting on those middle feet that we installed. A little hand sanding to make everything nice and soft. And let me explain how I'm gonna do this faux finish. This is my first time, so get ready. After attempting a few different techniques here, I've got more boards over there. I've decided to not water this down. You thin this stain down with mineral spirits. There is literally just a sponge worth of stain in here with about 6 ounces of mineral spirits. That's what we're gonna use to give this kind of gray effect where you can still see the wood grain. We're gonna water down some paint and came up with these two. Okay, so here's the aesthetic, let's go to it. Okay, again, I'm no expert, but here's how I did it. So I flooded the surface of the top with the watered down or diluted gray stain. I then wiped it clean. I let it dry for a little bit, but I did the face frame as well. Once this thing dries for about 30 minutes or so, I come back with some of the diluted paint, and here's how I did that. So what I got here is a little experiment, of course, full strength, hardly any, like we're talking like a cup of water with a paintbrush washed out in it. And then this is about maybe 1 ounce of paint and 4 ounces, 5 ounces of water. This is what I'm gonna use. All right, so I'm not a painter, wish me luck. I'm just gonna go light and see how it goes. I can always add more if I need to. Here we go. So I'm making light passes with a brush that hardly has any paint in it at all. You can see it's adding a pretty cool effect, but if you remember the picture from the beginning, here it is, this thing needs to be more white than gray. Now I made a bit of a mistake. I was texting the client, hey, what do you think of the gray without the white? And I didn't get a response quite yet, so I went ahead and went with the white anyway. Turns out she was like, ooh, I really like the gray. Can you leave it? Let this be a lesson to you. If you're doing a client build, do what's to their expectation and don't really ask too many questions because it's kind of hard for them to see on the phone what's really what. And again, it was one of those things where I was like, ooh, I could definitely try to soak back down the white with the gray, see what happens. And I do that here. Although I am liking the technique. The technique I've found was a little interesting. The painting techniques, the using a wire brush, And here's that flooding of the gray stain back on the white again to kind of gray it back up. And quite frankly, you're going to see I'm going to wipe off the excess, and this thing turned out pretty nice. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, and the client was too. The inner portion of this is all painted white, and I want to tell you guys, the finish as well is going to be Halcyon, of course, from Total Boat. This stuff is unbelievable stuff when you spray it on. I'm using an HVLP system from Fuji. I'm just going to spray this thing on, flood it on for about 2 coats, let it dry for around 12 hours, and come back with 320 and put a final coat on, and you are done. This stuff is fantastic. It's kind of hard to see in this shot here, but this is definitely one of my favorite finishes. And again, at the very end of the process, I come back with one of these almost, I guess, 12,000 grit, or I mean, I guess it's more of a 1,200 grit Scotch-Brite pad, and get the surface nice and smooth. We put the cubbies in, and now it's time to give you a shot of what this thing really looks like. Turned out pretty nice. Ah, there's that shine. That's that finish I was talking about. Look how great that looks. Woo! Love it. Hey, remember this? Remember this table? Farm table? You billed me for a long time, you probably have seen it. The clients I did that for are the same clients I did this for, and I want to thank them immensely. So, and I also want to thank you as well. Being here, your viewership means a lot to me. If you think I've earned your subscription, by all means, please do that as well. And don't forget to do this too, okay? Do that. And also, everything I have to offer in this worldwide web of content creation is down below in the description too. Again, you guys are awesome. Appreciate you joining me for this one. And my name's Chris, and I'll see you on the next project. Until then, y'all stay safe. See you later. So yeah, that's what we're gonna use for the underlayment, and then underlayment on the bottom coat. And then I've watered down some paint as well, and we're gonna do a couple techniques. And then my air compressor's gonna go off. Yeah! I think I've earned your subscription by all the means, by all the means, by all the means. Go to the store and just buy all the means. Hey, you got any means? I wanna buy some.